Dr. Dua, let me begin with the long-standing concern on India's huge dependence on China for APIs and intermediates. Nearly 68% by value comes from there. If you can give us a sense of how things are poised, have supplies resumed, reached near normalcy? What's the bit on the pricing? Have they stabilized? And related to that, in March this year, the government unveiled a scheme for bulk drugs aimed at boosting both cluster development and incentivizing API production. So, do you see all of this improving our competitiveness? Over to you, Dr. Dua.
Good morning, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. First of all, thanks to Anju and Informa for getting me here on this webinar. I understand the participation is very robust at about 800 plus. And I was just joking with Rahul that look, it looks like CPHI every year it keeps on increasing. So this is the biggest webinar that I'm attending as of now. It's been like coronavirus. There are two more viruses, you know. One is the VC virus and the other one is the webinar virus. So they go along, but it's been phenomenally of great value, awesome value in terms of interacting to the digital facilitation. You know, the ways of doing business in the future is going to change dramatically. And I think webinar, as well as the other ways of conferencing through VC, etc., will be the marquee event of the coronavirus infestation. You know, I'm pretty nostalgic, from the time on that I started my career way back in 1979, passing out of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, as a young upstart MBA. I walk into an organization at that point in time, number one pharmaceutical company in the world from Germany, Herx Pharmaceuticals Limited. Some of you must be aware of it. It's currently repriced a long time back as Sanofi Aventis. When I got in there, the first job, ladies and gentlemen, which I was handed over, was to work out the costing methodology. And we never had computers at that point in time. We never had any digital access to anything, just a small notebook or large sheets and typewriters and what have you. And of course, phone, which was a distance away from you. So my first job, along with two other colleagues from IIM Ahmedabad, was to make sure to do the costing right, both in terms of formulations and API, which is the subject that I'm going to speak upon right now. Why am I nostalgic about it? Because at that time, this is in the 70s, right? It's 70s. India was absolute importer, like Pakistan, like a whole host of other African countries, of every molecule in the world, right? May it be formulation, may it be API. We were vulnerably dependent on the West, particularly. China did not figure anyway. India actually was ahead of China at that point in time. Now, lo and behold, from that time onwards, 41 years down the line, the same company that I worked for, where I was asked to keep as much profit back in the backyard to make sure that there's no double taxation. Today, we are at a situation where India is a robust, almost close to $50 billion industry, vertically divided into domestic and exports into about 25. We missed 25 because of the fact that there was a lockdown in the last week of March. Otherwise, we would have reached to about 22 at least for sure. So that being said, look at a paradigm change which has come about, ladies and gentlemen. From net importers of everything and anything, may it be the smallest of small vitamin formulation, to an antibiotic, to a gastrointestinal tract stuff, what have you, APIs galore, right, being converted into formulations by majority of the MNCs at that point in time, to a stage, and as an Indian, all of us must be proud. We are the pharmacy to the world. We control 30% of the generic space all over the world, 40% of the US generic space, worth about $110 billion, ladies and gentlemen. And we supply 206 countries out of 211 countries in the world. Even those 5 countries, Francophone countries, are supplied from Paris. So we supply to everybody in the world. What a shift it has come about. Thanks to our leadership and our bureaucracy at that point in time, in the Uruguay round of talks that we did not sign on the dotted line, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about the pharmaceutical market and India being pharmacy to the world. From then on, a clarion call by the then Prime Minister was given that the chemistry skills India should come to the fore, and it did. The academia and industry, entrepreneurially, some of the best entrepreneurs in the world. I mean, you've got the likes of them even currently today as living legends who set upon a task upon themselves to make sure that we evolve, develop through industry, academia, collaboration, which was hitherto never known, but the necessity and the urge to do well and become self-sufficient drove academia and industry together. And today we are where we are. primarily because of that amalgam which happened. So let me now come back to a few statistics. Out of this 45 to 50 billion, it varies from place to place, but the Pharmexcil figure is broadly around $45 billion, vertically divided into domestic and exports at about $22 billion each. In the API space, currently the valuation of the total manufacturing, imports, and exports all put together works out about $12 billion. Now, out of this $12 billion, there is 4 billion which is exported out, and 8 billion is consumed internally. Now, look at this: $8 billion worth of domestic consumption, and correspondingly, concurrently, $4 billion worth of exports. Now, what does it tell you? It tells you that our domestic market is hugely and humongously double the size of that of the API overseas. And let's look at this scenario. Our market in API has been growing at about 9% year on year. However, the imports have been growing at about 10%. And this import figure of $4 billion is divided into China at about 70%, almost around $3.5 billion, and rest of it, which is the remaining 30%. Now, that remaining 30%, because of the current TRIPS situation that we are aligned to, that is the cutoff point between 1998, 31st December, and 1st of January 1999, permits you to coexist between the patented product and process, and the process patent prior to 31st of December 1998. So all of that import that you see of API predominantly consists of the patented molecules. The rest of it generic, and domestic part of it 70%. And if you were to differentiate further, statistically speaking, 90%, ladies and gentlemen, 90% of the domestic formulation is dependent vulnerably on the Chinese imports. Now, that's a very scary scenario. Over the last 1 decade, I, as the chairman of Pharmexcil, as well as various other hats that I wear in Confederation of Indian Industry, as chairman of Northern Life Sciences, and from my own company, Nectar Lifesciences, we are predominantly a $450 million company with close to about 90% coming from API. We are the biggest in the world in cephalosporins, which is very, very high tech, both oral and injectable, part of the domain, and antibiotics. But when you look at it, the government would listen to us, give us promises, tell us that, look, we want to become self-sufficient, but very precious little was done. Until this great, huge, tragic pandemic hit us, the wake-up call was not there. The wake-up call is there now, because what happened was earlier in 2008, as also during the Beijing Olympics, China was cleaned up by the government because that was a statutory requirement from both the sides, maybe the economic turn down or a Beijing Olympic requirement from International Olympic Confederation. They cleaned it up thoroughly and nicely. And then at that time, we realized suddenly that, look, we are so vulnerably dependent. There'll be a huge drug shortage. And from then on, the thoughts started emerging. But when Corona hit us and suddenly everything was stopped in terms of both imports and exports, it dawned on us that it's high time that we did some exercise in self-sufficiency of the APIs in the domestic market, which is double the size of $8 billion as compared to $4 billion. Now let's look at China. China was nothing as compared to us at a point in time that when we started emerging in APIs. We were the first country, ladies and gentlemen, very few of you know about it, to have moved into penicillin, the fermentation part of it. We were the first ones, right? But then we got whittled as we went along in the next 5 or 6 years. There were 5 companies, starting from Alembic, JK, and a whole host of other combinations, TGPL, TPGL, and so on and so forth. We started manufacturing excellent quality fermentation penicillin and vitamins as well. Hindustan Antibiotics Limited was one of the largest in Pimpri in Pune. So, but then Chinese government realized pretty early on in the 80s, mid 80s and thereabouts, that something needs to be done about APIs, because they had the raw materials, they had the requisite temperature in the provinces, and the government set about saying that, guys, to the industrialists, that we will give you land free, we'll give you water free, we'll give you electricity free, and that is 70% of the cost of the fermentation. You just go ahead and put on the entrepreneurship cap and take business forwards. And lo and behold, in about from the late 80s and truly speaking in 90s till now, that's 10 years plus 20 years and 30 years, every road on fermentation, every road from the innovator side in the West, US, Europe, Eastern Europe in particular, everything in fermentation has gone to China. There's nothing called fermentation in any part of the world, leave alone India. So that's the kind of excellence China brought about. And they did it in a graded manner. What did they do? They first give you the freebies, then they start charging you slightly. And then they do massive tricks in WTO. I'm very familiar with that, right? What they do currently is, which is not known to a lot of people, but we've done our own exercise and we're working very closely with the government of India, my ministry, Ministry of Commerce, that look, they give 12% export subsidy, but they give it in an indirect manner. Supposing you have a textile company which is remotely related to the promoter, they'll give that 12, they'll park that 12% there, and you will not see it in pharmaceuticals. Therefore, we as a domestic market, which is pretty lowly priced as compared to semi-regulated market, where we export $2.4 billion and $2.8 billion that we export to the regulated markets. In regulated markets, ladies and gentlemen, we have no competition from China. They cannot withstand our documentation. They cannot get themselves inspected. They have a problem with understanding of English and a whole host of others. That's why they've gone on a spree of hiring Indian intelligentsia to help them to reach up to the regulated markets. But I think post-COVID, it's going to be a tough call. Yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah. So Dr. Dua, so yeah, we are also, looking at the time. So that's a
Okay.
great roundup of the history and the overall
I'll just
backdrop. But
I'll just wind up saying I'll just
share your views quickly in the next just couple of minutes on the latest government incentives. So it gives our
okay.
Participants a broad idea of how effective these are to make Indian API manufacturers competitive.
Okay, Anju, I'm very, very passionate about it. That's why I can go on and on and on, time permitting, but it doesn't matter. Within the time constraint, I'll answer your question that look, today we are in a flux situation thanks to only positive side of COVID, if I'm permitted to say, is that the government has woken up. They've proactively come forward. They very clearly stated that, look, we will give you 3,000 crores, 1,000 crore each to the pharma parks. Chinese parks are huge. They are 10,000 acres or thereabouts, minimum sized. But here we can manage with 1,000 acres, not a problem. So they've already identified Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Badi in Himachal, which is a question mark in my considered view because they don't have the land. So maybe we're trying to get it in Punjab if we can. So that 3,000 crores is given there to the state government, and then the private sector can collaborate with the state government to make sure that in those parks on a long-term basis, everything is provided under one roof. May it be the inputs, may it be the testing facilities, may it be the ETP, the effluent treatment facility and transportation, everything, packaging as well. Now, outside of that, this 1,000 crore is an institutional investment, and the private investors will have to put in their part of the money, and you move forward. That's a good step forward. But that's going to be a long-term measure for about 2 years minimum. Let's come to the short-term measures. Short-term measures are that the government says that here is a list of 53 KSMs and APIs. Look at this, pick on any one of these where we are 100% dependent on China and make sure that you start manufacturing it in the next 6 months to a year's time. KSM fermentation will take 2 years, but chemical APIs, we have fantastic excellence. We are making those APIs for the regulated market, but we can't afford to make it for domestic because the pricing is absolutely abrasive from China at 50% of the cost or at about less than variable cost in certain cases. So the government says from a zero level, if you go up to 100 rupees, say, for example, in the first year, we'll give you 20% discount or subsidy or incentive. Don't call it subsidy, incentive. It's an investment by the government into the private sector. So your cost is 80. So, lastly, last month, that in case of capital, you will get subsidy at the rate of 12% every year for 8 years. So that's another incentive that you have. And overall, you'll become competitive. In addition to that, last but not the least, government says that for the sake of self-sufficiency, WTO permits you to impose duties, customs duty, anti-dumping duty, China, to make sure that in case you're self-sufficient, adequate quantities are there, they will be imposed 30 to 40%. A lot of countries have done it, so can India. And that's the time we can revive ourselves in the short term for sure.